Shalom Aleichem Rabotai. Mishnah Yomi is continuing. We have just begun yesterday Challah, and we mentioned yesterday the 5 species of grains from which we take Challah, and we also noted that those are the same 5 species that are Shaykh, Yashan, and Chadash, and the Mishnah explained that if they took root before the Omer offering was brought, then that Omer offering is matir them for that year, and now they're Yashan. But if not, then they're Chadash until the next year's Omer, and then they become Yashan. Now, Mishnah Beis brings another halacha that applies to these 5 species of grains. Ha'ochel mehem kezayit matzah b'Pesach. Yatza yedei chovato. If you eat a kezayit of matzah made from these 5 grains on Pesach, that works. Your yotze, your mitzvah of achilas matzah on Pesach. And this is why, Rabbosai, we have oat and spelt matzah variations that are low gluten and some that are made especially gluten-free for those who are sensitive. The Mishnah continues, Kazayat chametz. He ate a kazayat of these as chametz, not matzah. Chayiv b'hikoret. That's iser kores. That's very bad to do on Pesach. Nitarav echad mehen b'kol aminim. If one of these was mixed in with other types of food, meaning here means other species of food, like other dishes, hareze over b'Pesach. He's over having chametz in his possession on Pesach. For instance, if there was a barley kernel inside of the chicken, and then he baked up the chicken on Pesach, that he's got a problem, because he's got barley that's been cooked on Pesach in his chicken. It's going to make the entire chicken usser. There's actually a discussion in the poskim, does the barley kernel have to crack open? And a lot of poskim are machmir, even if the kernel of wheat or barley or whatever of these grains is not open. Some are machmir, that it would make the entire dish it's cooked with usser on Pesach, with chametz, because these are the 5 species that become chametz. The Mishnah continues a law about these 5 species, unrelated to Pesach. Hanoder minapat uminatfua, usser bahem, divrei Rabbi Meir. Someone takes a neder, a vow, prohibiting himself from eating pat. Pat is pas, like we know pas Yisrael is bread. The word pita comes from pat, of course, or from tvua. Tvua just means grains. So he's usher in these 5 species. When people talk about bread, they're talking about these 5 species, not about rice or other things. They're talking about these species. And tvua also, people are referring to these species. Chachamim omrim, hanoder min dagon, Eino aser elamehen. If someone takes a nether from dagon. Now, dagon is a more generic term that means a pile. But when they harvested, they made a pile of grains, and then they would, remember we talked about truma and meiser, they would take truma from the pile. That's the dagon. The dagon typically refers to these grains. So that's why someone takes a nether from dagon. It's not a nether against piles. It's against these particular grains. V'chayavim b'chala uv'maisot, and these grains are chayav and chala, as we learned yesterday in the first Mishnah, and in meiser. Now, these are the things that are chayav both in chala and meiser. There are other items we're going to see that are chayav and meiser, but not chala. Great. Mishnah Gimel, ve'elu chayavin b'chala peturin min meiser. Here are situations where there's a chiyuv to take chala, of havrashas chala, but they're pater from meiser. Haleket, hashicha, hapeya. Now, these are gifts given to the aniyim. Leket is where 1 or 2 stalks fell down during the harvesting process when they're bundling them up. And if that happens, they're left for the aniyim. Shicha is bundles that were forgotten. And peya is a corner of the field that was purposefully left for the aniyim to harvest from them. So these items are pater from meiser, because they're already gifts to the poor, but the poor people, the aniyim, who take the stuff home and process it into dough, do have to take challah. The hefker, and similarly something that's made ownerless, if it's hefker, it's pater from meiser, from tithes, but there's still an obligation of challah when whoever takes it from hefker takes it home and makes it dough. Well, meiser rishon shenitla trumato. And a meiser rishon that they went out of order, Rabbosai. They didn't take the truma gedola yet, the first 2% that goes to Cohen, but they took the meiser rishon that typically goes to the Levi, and then the Levi took his truma. He took 10% of that. He took what's called trumas meiser. So he went out of order. So even though it's pater now from truma gedola, since they went out of order, it's still chayav in challah. Or meiser sheni v'hekta sheniftu. Or meiser sheni, as we've been discussing, for the past little while. That was the previous Masechta. It's usually taken to Yerushalayim, but it could be redeemed onto coins, and also hekdesh, something belonging to the temple, given to the temple, that's then redeemed, that's purchased back from the temple. So these are pater from Meiser, but if it's grains that are chayev and challah, the 5 species of grains, he has to separate challah. Umotar haomer, and the leftovers from the omer. We mentioned the omer yesterday as being matir the chadash to make it into yashan. So they would harvest a bunch of barley and grind it down into very fine daka, very fine particles, solets of barley to bring the offering. But what about all the leftovers that they sifted out? That's motor omer, that could be redeemed also from hekdesh and be used for your normal lunch. So bli neder, I'm planning to do so when we have the temple. B'mehera menu is to buy some of the leftover barley flour from the omer. Utzfua shalo hevia shlish, and also grains that have not brought 1/3, meaning they're not 1/3 ripe. That's sort of the minimum level to v'chiyuv in meiser and truma, is if they're 1/3. Now normally you let it grow all the way, but even 1/3 growth, it still has enough to be chayev in meiser. So if he harvested it before that and started making a dough out of it, technically yes, it's chayev, it's pater in meiser and truma, but it's still chayev in challah. Rabbi Eliezer omer tzfua shelo havia shlish patur min achala. Rabbi Eliezer says if it's not even brought a shlish yet, it's exempt not even from meiser and truma, it's also exempt from challah, because Rabbi Eliezer learns that challah is compared to truma. As we're going to see further in Masechta, it's sort of a form, a subtype of truma. It's just truma from the dough instead of truma from the grains. So since grains that are not yet a shlish, not yet a third, are a pater from truma, they're also pater from challah. Rabbi Eliezer. Shkoyach, Rabosai.